Title: The Never-Ending Road. It all started when the narrator, let's call him Jake, and his friends were driving back from a camping trip late at night. The GPS suggested a shortcut through a back road, which seemed like a good idea at the time. They turned onto the road, surrounded by dense trees, and began driving. At first, everything seemed fine. The road was quiet and peaceful. But as they drove further, the GPS signal started to cut out. They thought nothing of it, just a dead zone in the woods. But after 30 minutes, they realized something strange. They hadn't passed any other cars, houses, or even street signs. The road seemed to stretch endlessly. Jake checked the odometer, and they'd driven at least 10 miles, but there were no turns or forks in the road, just the same dark, tree-lined path. They laughed it off nervously, thinking they'd somehow missed a turn, and decided to keep going. An hour passed. Then two. The road didn't change. It was as if they were stuck in some kind of loop. The forest seemed to close in tighter, and the air inside the car grew colder. Jake's friend Mark suggested turning back, but when they tried to make a U-turn, the headlights illuminated something horrifying. A sign that read, "Keep driving. Don't turn back." Panic set in. None of them remembered seeing the sign before, but the implication was clear. They were being watched. Despite their fear, they decided to push forward, hoping the road would eventually end. But the longer they drove, the stranger things became. The clock on the dashboard froze. The gas gauge stopped moving. Shadows darted between the trees, but when they shone a flashlight into the woods, there was nothing there. Eventually, they saw a faint light in the distance, a gas station. Relief washed over them as they pulled in, only to realize it was completely abandoned. The pumps were rusted, the windows boarded up, and the light was just a flickering neon sign. Desperate, Jake tried calling for help, but there was no signal. His other friend Sarah ventured inside the gas station to look for clues. She came back holding a dusty old map, but the map didn't make sense. It showed roads and landmarks that didn't exist anymore, as if it was from another era. They decided to keep driving. Hours turned into what felt like days. They were exhausted, hungry, and disoriented. Just as they were about to give up, they saw another light, a house this time. The house was an old, decrepit cabin with a single lantern glowing in the window. Against their better judgment, they approached and knocked on the door. An old man answered. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. "You're on the never-ending road," he said. "No one escapes unless they follow the rules." "What rules?" Jake asked. The old man handed them a piece of paper with cryptic instructions: drive exactly 66 miles per hour. Do not stop for anything, no matter what you see or hear. And whatever you do, don't look in the rearview mirror. Terrified but with no other option, they got back in the car and followed the instructions. At first, everything seemed fine, but then came the sounds. Whispering voices called their names. Something heavy thudded on the roof of the car. Sarah screamed that she saw a face in the mirror, but Jake shouted at her not to look.